All right, Vicki, it is 101 on the nose.
101.
I'm going to let you continue to let people in.
Okay, and you do an intro?
I'm going to kick it off here in Princeton.
Everyone's
I know
confused.
they're confused because this is not how we do things, but welcome. Right now, Vicki and I are here at Miele, USA in Princeton, New Jersey, where we woke up to a very cold, I think it was like 19 or 20 degrees when I went to the gym this morning, and it was 50 a couple days ago. So
It was. But
sweater.
we still have tons of snow.
We have tons of snow. It was sweater and boot weather, but we're happy to be here in a nice warm kitchen. You are so used to seeing Vicki and I do all of the prep, all of the cleanup, and all of the talking that this is a wonderful change of pace for us, because we're going to be watching and learning along. But again, we're here in Princeton. For those of you that are new and joining us for the first time, this is our U.S. headquarters, but we are also one of 10 beautiful experience centers located throughout the country, many of which are teaching virtual classes. We're filming videos for our Miele Cooks YouTube channel, so hopefully you might recognize our faces from there. But we are so excited today to have Maine Grains joining us again. I'm going to let Vicki kind of introduce our special guest, and I'm going to take this.
She just doesn't want to have to say Skahigan because I was practicing it.
You have all morning.
So again, welcome everyone. My name is Vicki Robb, and we were introduced to Maine Grains last year. We were looking for somebody to do a class with, really learning more about bread and flour. And I came across Amber and Maine Grains. And I have said before, I was amazed at the speed of the reply via social media from Maine Grains. I mean, immediately. So that was a good sign for me, like, okay, this is a good company to work with. So many of you did attend our class, I guess it was already last year, where we made brown bread with Amber, and it's very traditional.
Last year. I can't believe we're saying last year.
Very traditional Northeast Boston, Maine brown bread, which was delicious. I know some of you sent us pictures that you had made it. But by popular demand, you all said, we want another class with Maine Grains. So we are so excited today to have Amber Lamke, the founder and CEO of Maine Grains, and along with her baker, and apparently co-conspirator.
Co-conspirator. I don't know what that's about. Maybe we'll find out a little bit more along the way.
Evan Orloff is with Amber today. He's her baker who really worked on this recipe for all of you. And we're so excited that they're going to show us how to make English muffins. I've told you before, I eat one almost every day.
And I can attest to that.
She can attest to that.
She eats at least one every day.
With an egg and avocado or cheese some days, but it's such a great breakfast staple. So we're excited to learn from them all about grains and flour, what they do, why their product's better than what you're going to get mass market off your store shelf. We've also submitted to them the questions that you sent to me in advance. So we're going to talk about sourdough starter. We're going to talk about whole wheat flour, how to adjust water levels based on the flour you're using. So they have all those questions and they will be answered.
If we are lucky enough, we might even get a sighting of her cat in the rafters. If anybody joined us last time, that was the highlight for Vicki and I. We were watching and learning, and then we just see this big kitty in the rafters. So I'm hoping the cat makes an appearance.
You're such a cat person.
I'm such a cat lover, so
she actually owns a cat costume.
I do.
We'll
Don't ask about that.
But I want to remind you that Maine Grains products are sold online on their online store, but they're also available in the Northeast from, Maine, Vermont, all the way down through New York City. I had one of our regular class attendees email me this morning that they sell Maine Grains in her local gourmet market in Manhattan. So look around your area. I'm sure you can find it, but definitely connect with them on Instagram and Facebook. You'll love all of the information you get, some recipes. So please go ahead and do that as well.
Don't forget, they still have given us a Miele discount code that we can use. So if anybody needs to purchase any of the supplies or the things that Amber and Evan talk about today, just use the code Miele online to get a nice little discount, save a few dollars, and order something else to make up for it.
There you go.
All right, so I think we should probably switch screens. I'm going to play with this a little bit.
And everybody's like, yay, Vicki and Mary are going to be muted.
Exactly. So we're going to spotlight their video. Amber, you can unmute yourselves, and we're going to let you take it away. Actually, I can probably do it. Oh, she's got it. All right.
Great. Hi, Vicki. Hi, Mary. Great to be with you again. And you can see the rafters. There's no cat up there now, but he might appear. He likes to join when there's activity in the kitchen. So we're pleased to be with you. And English muffins are such a good entry point for baking. So we're excited to be showing a recipe that we use at Maine Grains and in our cafe here in Skowhegan, Maine. And for those of you who have never been to Maine or have never looked at a map to see where Skowhegan is, we're kind of smack dab in the center of the state. About an hour and a half north of Portland, not far from Colby College. And we sometimes refer to our area as the gateway to the North Woods. We're about an hour from the coast and right close to the mountains and beautiful rivers where there's great whitewater rafting and hiking and skiing to be done. So my name is Amber Lamke, and as has already been said, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Maine Grains. We're a grist mill located in a renovated jailhouse in the center of Skowhegan, Maine. And just briefly, you can read more about our story at mainegrains.com, but really I come to grains and baking by way of community organizing is what I like to say. So I became involved in some of the local food efforts in Skowhegan and helping to grow our local farmers market. And a grassroots group of us really started seeing that bakers weren't able to source local grains for their baked goods. And we started wondering why grains were missing from the discussion around local food, because in the Northeast, a lot of our states used to grow an abundance of grain, and we've largely lost that due to the economies of scale that have supported grain production in the Midwestern parts of the US. So anyway, it was really through asking questions about how to make local grains available to bakers in our region that I come to now be running some of the infrastructure that makes that possible. So we renovated an old jailhouse in the center of our downtown. The reason being it was a building that was going to become available, and it's very sturdy. And you'll see pictures on our website and some videos that we can vertically stack milling equipment so that we use gravity when we send grain to the top of the building, and we gravity feed through the machines on the way down to clean grains, to take the husky hull off of some grains like spelt and oats, and then to mill it into flour. So we're going to talk about flour in a minute, but before I get into that, I am going to let Evan introduce himself here for a second. And in the midst of COVID, here's a silver lining, I guess. In the midst of COVID, our little cafe inside our grist mill, as many of you can relate, had to pivot and turn its attention to more retail items that our local community could come stop by and pick up and take home to enjoy. And so bread has always been on our list of goals for things to be making more routinely at the grist mill. And right at around that time, our beloved baker in our farmers market decided to retire, leaving a pretty big gap in the marketplace for good fresh bread in Skowhegan. So I began to ask around within our network and was able to find Evan and convince him to move to Skowhegan. So let me just let him introduce himself for a moment before we carry on.
Thank you, Amber. I'm from Philadelphia. I went to college up in the Northeast in Vermont. I'd been living in California for 7 years, but it wasn't until 2019, August, that I got into baking. And then once COVID happened, I made the option to move back east, and a friend of a friend got connected with Amber, and she gave me a really great opportunity to head the baking program at Maine Grains and build out a bakery within the Miller's table.
Great. So we are in my kitchen at home, and I will preface this by saying at work we mask, but we've kind of adopted Evan into our family pod, and so we're unmasked today by design, and he's part of our posse here now. So I want to talk about flour just for a few minutes before we get into the steps of this recipe. Evan's going to walk you through the stages of making English muffins. But flour, which is sort of your primary ingredient here, matters. And so we want to know what's the difference as we get going. So I'm just going to reach over here. Actually, if you just pass me those two plates so that we're in view. Great. So in our facility in Maine Grains, we are using stone milling equipment. And these are stone mills that we purchased from Austria. At the time that we started our business in 2012, there were no manufacturers still in the US making traditional style millstones for making stone milled flour. And stone milled flour is as it sounds. You have two stones that can be oriented this way, horizontally or vertically. And our stones are stacked one on top of the other. The bottom stone is called the bed stone, and the top stone is called the runner stone. And the runner stone is turning while grain is dropped into the center of the eye of the stones to pulverize as it travels across the surface of the lands and furrows. The raised parts of the stones and the grooves of the stones are called lands and furrows. So you are literally taking the kernel of grain and you are grinding the flour by breaking the particles down in that way. That is different from the way in which white flour is produced. So white flour is produced on what's called roller mills. And a roller mill has rolls, and they're turning inward so that the grain that falls between the rolls is sheared, is flattened. And the white flour is the result of shearing that endosperm piece of the kernel, or that little belly of the kernel that's full of the white carbohydrate. That is sheared away from the bran, and a mill will then separate those particles that are sheared apart to separate bran from germ from the white flour. And on these machines, you can also see other byproducts like cream of wheat, for example. When you think of that texture of cream of wheat, that is called the farina particle of the kernel. That can be separated apart too in a roller milling process. So that really white flour, what is left is exclusively the carbohydrate part of the kernel. So white flour is just fundamentally different from stone milled flour in that stone milled flour will have microscopic particles of bran throughout the flour, and it will have all of the nutritious oils and germ pieces that are part of the kernel in the flour. Now we do, I have an example of the flour to show you. I'm just gonna hold it up to the phone. You can see in that flour, there's some brown flecks. You know that it's fresh flour if you, I'm gonna show you a picture. Give you an example here. When we're milling, we're often looking for a nice, fresh, lively texture by squeezing a handful of the flour and opening it back up. And we're looking for some cracking in the flour. This is some of the oils holding the flour together. And it shows us that this flour has been milled fine enough to have a mixture of fines and coarse particles. If the flour, when we squeeze it like this and we open up our hand, were to just fall through our fingers, kind of like sand, we would know that the particles are still too coarse and that we haven't pulverized enough or clamped down on the stones quite enough. But you can see in this flour, the bran is nice and small. One of the benefits of stone milled flour is that the bran and the germ, it's a natural product that's been out in nature, and it helps the fermentation process in breads. It has microflora and natural properties that are going to help with your fermentation. The other flour that I have here is an example of the all-purpose sifted flour that we mentioned in the recipe and that we're using today in the English muffins. Now you can see this is a little bit lighter in color, but if you were up close to this flour, you would still see microscopic, really small pieces of bran. And that's because we're stone milling the flour and we're sending it through a sifter to take out some of the largest particles of bran. leaving a lighter textured flour that is still perfect for all-purpose baking. So there's more fiber in this flour than white flour. And when you bake with it, you're still going to find that your bread is going to have a creamy colored crumb rather than a white crumb. And it lends a lot more flavor than white flour. So you're going to hear us talking about using the sifted all-purpose flour today, which has been stone milled. All right.
Is it time to mix?
It's almost time to mix. I'll just say briefly, so the ingredients today include the sifted flour. We're going to be working with water. We're going to be working with instant yeast, although we will address whether or not you could use sourdough in an English muffin recipe. Evan's going to walk you through making a poolish and what a poolish is. But definitely give a visit to the Maine Grains website. You can see a whole variety of flours that we mill, including some heritage grains and whole grains. There's a few behind me here. One of the benefits of reviving relationships with farmers in our region and the milling infrastructure to process is that we can have specialty grains grown, like some heritage grains. This one is an Åland variety from Denmark. And we feature some other ancient and heritage grains that are now being grown locally as well. So without further ado, I think I'm going to turn it over to Evan, and he's going to talk you through the recipe that we've chosen for today.
Yeah. So the recipe comes from tartine, a classic revisited. Tartine is kind of like the mecca of bakeries, one of them in San Francisco. I love their pastry. It's refined, it's not too sweet, really great ingredients. So they modified a sourdough English muffin recipe and turned it into a yeasted English muffin. So it's a little bit quicker and easier for the home baker. You can also make English muffins out of a classic French baguette recipe. But for us, we're gonna just stick with a yeasted. So we got at our bakery, we use 75% extraction flour, which we don't retail. We retail just the classic all-purpose, which is 86% extraction. That means that 14% of the brand germ endosperm has been removed. So this is going to take on a little bit more water than a 75% extraction flour. And for that reason, I bumped up the hydration that I use at our bakery for this recipe. And I think that we could even push it further, which I did for this example. I bumped it up to 76%. I believe that I provided everybody with a 73% hydration. And that just means it's easier to handle the results. It might not have as many large nooks and crannies, but you can kind of work your way up the more comfortable you get with the recipe.
And Evan just made a good point. So, you know, when you're using different flours, you want to think about the higher the bran content in your recipe, the more hydration you might need. Bran is going to absorb your moisture.
Yeah. And so I just put in the flour. I'm going to pour in the water. And okay, so this morning, what I did to, I wanted to talk about a poolish. So a poolish is traditionally, it's 1-to-1 flour to water and then yeast. There are different kinds of pre-ferments, like a biga, it's a bit stiffer, but a poolish is very classic, and that's the general consensus of French bakers. So I made this morning, the one that I made for the dough that we're actually gonna make today in griddle. I did that overnight in the hallway of my staircase where it's a little bit cooler than my apartment. But what I did, if you can see, this tripled in volume. And I did this morning by feeding it warm water and keeping it, near the stovetop.
And this is a poolish 101 trick. Wait, show this again, where when you mix, you put a rubber band around your container, if you can see that, and then you can watch how much it's growing over time. Okay, you can see where you started and where you ended up with your nice lively culture.
So I'm going to pour all that in. Now for the recipe, I had you guys mix this I think I missed it on the directions, but it's just 3 minutes. It's just to combine. Then you let it sit for 30 to hydrate. Now, for this class and just the purpose of mixing, I'm gonna mix everything together. So I'll combine the poolish water and flour, and then I will just, once that's combined, I'll mix in the remaining ingredients of yeast, salt, and olive oil. So I'm just gonna turn that on low so it doesn't splash around the flour. And then I'll let that go for about 3 minutes. And once that's combined, I'll pour in everything else. Now, this is a thing you're gonna see from recipe to recipe. You're gonna see different instructions and different timing, and that's okay. A lot of these, it's not that they're wrong, it's just that they're different recipes and different styles of baking and a bit different outcomes. So it comes down to your preference and what you like. And that's kind of it's my part of my self-discovery as a baker is, trying to figure out what the baking that I want to do and piece together bits of information from different recipes and different bakers and different videos that I watch. I mean, it's something that I obsess about because I made it in my career. You don't have to do the same, but it's just, it's endless out there. So don't get bogged down, have fun with it. Don't be like me.
We could also share that we really only just learned to make English muffins since September when you arrived at the cafe, and the goal was really to improve our breakfast sandwich at the cafe. We were doing a focaccia style bread that wasn't really authentic focaccia, and we knew that people love breakfast sandwiches on a Saturday morning, but we wanted to make them better. And English muffins really are a great entry level bread. And if we didn't say this clearly up front, the fun part about them is that they don't necessarily need to go in an oven at all. They're going to get griddle baked. They're going to get baked on the griddle on both sides. And so it's a great stepping in point for people that are learning to work with dough or want to try a whole wheat product, but don't have a lot of familiarity with whole wheat breads, but are trying to work more fiber into their breads. It's a great way to use up sourdough discard. So if you're a sourdough baker and you're refreshing your sourdough and discarding some, you could use some of that discard to mix an English muffin dough that's pretty versatile and quick and ready to bake for your family. And when I first started talking about English muffins with Evan, most of the recipes I was finding called for milk powder, and that doesn't work if we're trying to also be friendly to vegans. So we just kept looking to find one that kept the milk out of it. But what would milk powder do to the recipe?
Milk powder tends to make your bread a little bit lighter in texture on the crumb, but you can achieve that through higher hydration. It's also just not a product that a lot of people have in their cabinets at all times. So this was kind of minimizing ingredients, just so it's a bit easier for the home baker and you don't have to stress about having this or that.
Great. And then the other thing I was just going to mention is if you're having a lot of fun with baking at home and you follow bakers on Instagram or Facebook, you're probably seeing some trending around reducing food waste by incorporating scraps of things into your baking. And so we have some friends in our network, Amy Halloran, who is the #flour ambassador and author, and some of her pals are doing things like putting pureed squash into English muffins or saving the edible skins of squash and other vegetables and pureeing it to add it into English muffins as fiber and flavor. So there's a lot of room for play in these, which is part of what we thought would be fun to do with you today.
And I remember that somebody did pose a question, can you use whole wheat? And you can absolutely use whole wheat, which would mean that none of the bran, none of the germ, none of the endosperm has been sifted out. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to bump the hydration up to compensate for it taking on more water. And so it's not as stiff. So I just ended the mix a little early, just so we can move on and cut out some English muffins and get them on the griddle.
All right, so I just turned on the griddle behind me. I'm turning on the griddle to a medium low. So heat on your griddle is going to be important. You need it hot enough so that these little muffins can pop, so that the heat makes them spring up off the griddle and create those nice bubbly holes on the inside. You don't want your griddle so hot that they brown and blacken too fast, because they need time on both sides to get the center of your muffin fully cooked. So I'm on a medium-low setting right now. I can always bump it up a little bit more if I need to, but I want my cast iron pan to be sort of thoroughly warm in all spots. Evan and I make now upwards of 200 English muffins every Wednesday afternoon for service at the cafe. And so we're doing that on a traditional restaurant griddle. We also have some great big cast iron griddles that span 2 burners and are really wonderful because they're nice and thick. At home, I would choose, if you have cast iron, great. If you don't, I would choose your pan that has a nice thick bottom that's going to hold an even heat. A pan that is too thin might leave you too close to the heat and might cause burning. So,
and if you find that they're browning quicker than the sides you're going to cook and you're worried about burning them, you can always throw them in an oven at about 350 degrees and then finish them off in the oven for about 10 minutes, give or take.
And we can show them that when these things go on the griddle, we can show you what stage and how you make decisions about that. So we're preheating our pan. We're gonna dump the dough that we've already made, and we're gonna show you how to stamp these out. And wanna take it away?
Yeah. And one thing I want to talk about, the poolish. The reason the overnight poolish is kind of the recommendation from many bakers is because you're building flavor throughout that fermentation process overnight. So you can speed it up just like I did this morning if you're in a rush and you want to, bake something. But overnight is kind of a set it and forget it, and it'll be ready the next morning. And you just leave it at a cool temperature. If it was too warm, you could throw it in the fridge. But for better flavor, the longer fermentation is best. So I'm just going to flour the counter just to, prevent a little bit of sticking, so we can pull them off nicely. And then
Just to set your
we'll flour this pan.
bit of flour, or
Actually,
you want to talk about rice
you know
flour
what?
versus?
We're going to use a little cornmeal, which can burn at too high of a temperature, but it's good with helping prevent sticking, and it's pretty classic to English muffins.
When you buy English muffins and you've got that kind of coarse, gritty side that's on the side that touches the griddle, that's usually cornmeal. You can also use rice flour if you'd prefer, but you're looking for something that just allows these muffins to not stick to your pan and not stick to your griddle once we transfer to the griddle. So we have a little Maine grains milled corn. This is actually polenta. It's a nice coarse particle. We'll try that today, and it adds a nice yellow color. You could also use rice flour.
So here's the dough that I made with my overnight poolish, and I mixed the dough today. It's puffed up quite a bit. So now I'm just going to dump it out. Okay, and you'll see all those little pockets. You can see them, all the fermentation going on. I'll dust the top of this with a little bit of flour. And then I'm going to just pat it down. I'm going to be gentle. I don't want to knock out all the air, but I'm just trying to get it to about a 1/2 inch. Kind of push it from the center to the edges. You want it to be even.
And this might be a good time to just remind folks that, in any dough, whether you're working a pizza dough or a bread dough or your English muffin dough, you're working with the natural tendency of the dough to build gluten strength as you mix a dough. And the more you touch your dough, the more that you can think of the gluten strands as being like little rubber bands, right? They're elastic in nature. And so the more you touch your dough, the more you're causing the gluten to contract and spring back together like an elastic band. And when you let your dough rest, you're actually giving those gluten strands a chance to relax again. So Evan is just lightly patting out the English muffin dough. He doesn't want to handle it too roughly, both because he doesn't want to degas it, but you also don't want that dough ball to constrict back up and tighten up your gluten. And we're just using a simple ring. This is about 3.5 inches.
I think 3.
3 inches. You could use a tin can. You could use your favorite cookie cutter.
You can make little 1-inch English muffins for the little kiddos running amok.
Kid size. You'll notice he's not reballing, he's not reshaping the English muffins. Part of what will happen with this cut on the side where it's cut is that gives the English muffin room to spring up when it hits the griddle.
And some of you might be thinking, well, what do you do with this excess? And you can, reball it, reknead it, and then let it reproof, because by rekneading it and pushing it all back together, you're going to knock out any gas that was in there. So then it's going to need to kind of sit back and reproof. So this is just a little one that I'm showing you. Roll it into a ball. I could pack it down, with a little floured palm.
And you can see now that he's worked the dough again, it's constricted back up to be tight. So it needs time to rest for those gluten strands to relax again.
So now we have one that's about a little sticky, similar to the ones that I already cut out, but it has no gas in it now. So now we're just gonna have to let that sit idly by. And we have these done. I can stamp out the rest. Should we go over any?
Great. So our griddle is warming. Evan's finishing out the stamping. Before you want to talk about rest time and what the recipe says about rest?
Yeah, so this recipe suggests that once you stamp them out, you let them sit for about 20 minutes. And that's just because you probably knocked a little bit of air out. And so it's just gonna let them proof a bit further. So that's the point of the rest period.
And what's the right thickness? We'll talk about our experience with that.
About patting them out?
No, just the height of the dough itself. So if you get too thick, you might have some trouble getting the center of your muffin cooked in the amount of time that you have on the griddle, flipping from one side to the other. So what would you say? You're at about a 1/2 inch thick?
Yeah.
1/2 inch thickness should be about right. All right.
Okay.
Let me check the heat. Mary, Vicki, any questions so far before we get on to the baking?
We are checking in over here. No questions coming through, but we are checking our emails to see if anybody else has any along the way.
Okay, great. A question came in before the workshop. We're just going to give this one more minute to warm up. It's doing great. A question came in by email about whether or not you could use steam on English muffins.
Yes.
And Miele, we know from the brown bed workshop, makes a great steam oven. Can you explain what would happen if you put English muffins in an oven versus on a griddle?
The answer is yes, you can use steam, but what steam does is it helps create a really nice crust on your dough. That's why steam is integral to sourdough. It helps build that really crunchy crust that glistens. And so if you use steam on these, you're just going to create a crust around the entire English muffin. Whereas the beauty of English muffins is you got that crisp top from griddling it with butter, so a lot of flavor there. And then you have this really soft sides and interior. So you're just going to create a different kind of crust when you steam it, and the shape will be a little bit different as well. That's my 2 cents on steam.
And butter, we should talk about butter.
Butter is king, but you can fry in anything. Butter is just my favorite.
Or not fry. Evan doesn't believe me that you can make an English muffin without butter. We use butter at the cafe, and it adds flavor and it makes for a nice crisp muffin. But if you were trying to hold off on butter in your diet or whatnot, you can do them dry. It would just give your English muffin a little bit of a drier look. We'll do it with butter today so that you can see. And at the cafe, we use clarified butter. You want to explain what that is?
Clarified butter is the removal of the milk solids. So then you're left with just the fat, which allows you to cook at a higher temperature. Where if you cook butter on, medium high heat for an extended period of time, you're going to end up burning the milk solids. So this just allows you to use butter, get the flavor of the fat without worrying about burning the butter.
And all you're doing.
I have one question, Amber.
Yeah.
Somebody just emailed a question, and I don't know if you would know this in Maine, where would you have to adjust for altitude baking with English muffins?
I've heard that that's a myth, that altitude, particularly with sourdough, that altitude does not affect sourdough, but I don't know how it affects yeasted breads.
And I'm afraid I don't
try
have
it and let us
any
know.
experience with. I don't have
I think they need
experience
to
with
try
other
it and let us know.
altitude.
What was that?
I said, I think that the person that asked maybe needs to try it and report back to us.
Yes, I would agree.
I have another question. I have somebody that's actually baking along right now. And if you want to, sure, we're going to turn the camera back on. Somebody's baking along and they made the dough this morning and they're saying right now it feels super sticky and wet and they couldn't get them to cut out the dough. Should they add a little more flour and let it sit a little bit longer before trying again?
At this stage, when you're past the mixing stage, it's not the ideal time to add more flour. If they feel like there's fermentation, and it's sticky and they can still dump it, I would dust your table. I would dust the top of the dough, and then the rings or whatever you're using to stamp out, I would, dunk them in a little bit of flour and, your hands, and use that as kind of a protective layer.
It's okay that the dough is wet going to the griddle. And there are some days in the cafe where the dough feels wetter than other days. And just keep in mind that the temperature and humidity outside and the temperature of your kitchen can all play into what that dough is actually going to feel like when you go to dump. So wet is okay. And as Evan said, just use some flour to try to protect your hands and keep the process moving to the griddle as best you can without a sticky mess.
And before we move to the griddle, last question. Is there a max time to have the poolish ferment?
I've read in a bunch of recipes, 12 to 16 hours is kind of like your window. So I use that as the rule of thumb. I'm sure you can go shorter. I'm sure you can push it longer. It will have, impacts on the bread that you're making, but 12 to 16 hours is pretty common.
So 12 to 16 if it's at that 55 degrees?
Yeah, I mean, it could be at 60, it could be at 50.
Okay.
Everything with baking is, it's a variation of your environment. That's why it's really hard to bake from a cookbook or a recipe online and expect the same results, because there's so much information that hasn't been told to you. They don't tell you what kind of flour they're using. That what we're using today, but quite often they just say bread flour. Well, bread flour is different across the board, depending who's milling it. The temperature of their water, they'll make suggestions. Sometimes the kind of yeast that they're using is unclear, whether it's dry, active, or instant. So there's a lot of variations. So, you try something out and then you can always tweak. It's a game and guess and check.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna move over to the griddle. Will you bring the phone? We're gonna bring this camera a little bit closer to the griddle so you can get a close-up look.
Sounds
at
good.
what's going over here.
Whoa, technical difficulties.
Point it down a little. All right, great. That's perfect. All right, so you see our muffins, they're looking good. I've got a little butter handy. We're gonna do it Evan's way today. Plenty of it. All right, got a nice sizzle, that's good.
Yeah, you want to try and avoid putting, English muffins on a cold griddle. Super important.
All right, so I'm just transferring with a spatula. See how many I can get on here. I don't know if any of your listeners are collectors of cast iron, but I've got a lot of different cast iron pieces in my house. It's my favorite thing to cook on. Really even heat, simple cleanup usually. All right. So now we wait. There's a little bit of sizzle. Like I said, I'm right on medium heat or so, hot enough that this butter is sizzling, but I don't want them to burn. And you're going to start to see the muffins do some pop if all goes well here.
Hopefully.
And the pop and the spring in these English muffins is what you want, because when you go to cut one of these open, you want that craggy, holy interior. And there's a couple of different ways that you could cut open an English muffin, but you sometimes read on the package of your the English muffins you buy in the grocery store that they're fork split, for example. We'll show you this at the very end, but if you use a fork to split your muffin open, you're gonna reach those little holes on the inside. You're gonna leave a nice craggy surface on the inside of the muffin so that when you go to toast it, you've got lots of crispy bits. All right.
And Amber, how long would you say per side?
It varies, but again, you're watching for browning on the bottom. See, that's browning really nicely. I'm gonna go ahead and flip that one. Really nice color. You can tell the hot spots in the middle. So I'm gonna hold off. Maybe the edges are a little cooler, but I know the hottest spot is in the center. And I've read it can be up to 8 minutes per side, but on a hotter oven where it's not burning, it might be faster than that. Just gonna check the browning on these over here. I might even turn them a little bit gently to make sure that all the sides get brown. And you'll know your pan the best, whatever you're using for a pan. But I rotate the position. So if I know this is the really hot spot, then on a flip, I might send this one to a corner and bring one of the less done ones to the center. Let's take another peek. Okay, it's looking good so far. I'm gonna go ahead and move this one out to the edge and flip this one. Now I'm just gonna steady it and flip like this because this side is still cool. You wanna be careful not to be too aggressive about your flip. Your English muffin and the shape of your muffin is gonna take the shape of however it hits first. So if you flip like a pancake and one edge hits first, you might end up with a little lopsided muffin. Not the end of the world, it'll still taste great. All right, let's check these.
We had a couple questions we could ask while you guys are doing that.
Of
Yeah,
course.
shoot.
So Yvonne emailed that she's made English muffins in the past with a much more liquid batter. Have you had any experience with that, and what would the difference be?
That's a great question. In fact, I was saying to Evan as we prepared for this class that English muffins are traditionally a dough that you can cut out and that are freestanding. But the difference between an English muffin, say, and a crumpet would be that you would be, let me grab our mold here. In a crumpet, you would be using one of these kinds of rings on your griddle, and you'd be pouring a liquid batter into the ring, and it might be a ½ an inch worth of batter, and you get little craggy holes on the inside. But that's the difference between a crumpet and an English muffin, is you'd be supporting the crumpet with your ring until it's cooked in order to remove it.
Linda would like to know if you need to cover the coolish when it's proofing.
You need to cover the coolish when it's proofing.
Yeah, just to keep things out of it. I put a lid on mine. You don't want to have anything that's airtight. But you can always drape a towel, on top of it and just put a rubber band around it to just seal it. But yeah, I would recommend covering it.
Perfect.
Okay, so Evan, this is a great point to just tell the listeners or show the listeners what you mean by transferring to the oven. So right now I'm getting nice color. Nothing's burning too fast. If you feel like things are browning too fast and yet you still see this kind of soft side to your muffins, then you might want to turn your heat down a little bit, because it needs to be on here long enough for the muffin to cook through. If you're getting nervous about heat and your muffins were getting too dark, or if you had 200 to do like we do on Wednesdays, you might transfer to a sheet tray when they get brown like this. And what have we learned about the oven?
It's just a bit, you can go higher heat and on the stovetop, and then you don't have to worry about cooking them through thoroughly on the stovetop. You can just focus on getting the proper color and the proper pop and rise out of your English muffin, and then you can throw them in the oven.
So color and pop, and then you could go to a sheet tray at 350 for 10 to 13 minutes. Again, that's if you're trying to churn out a big batch of them. And when we make a huge batch at the cafe, we do freeze them. They freeze very well. So you'd go to a cooling rack at the end of the bake, cool them completely, and then put them in a plastic bag and freeze.
What is the most popular toppings for your English muffins in your cafe?
I'll let you answer that.
Well, we created them with the purpose of selling breakfast sandwiches on Saturday mornings. And so our breakfast sandwich, we do a meat and a veggie, and it's pretty classic. It's an egg, bacon, and cheese with, local Gouda. We have a cheesemaker who's right next door to us. And then we top it with a little chipotle aioli for a little spice.
Mary's getting in her car right now.
I'm on my way.
She loves Gouda.
It's my favorite. We also have one or two more questions, just if I could chime in. When you were using your cast iron griddle, you said you did it about a medium, or what was
about medium. My stove registers from low, and then it's numerical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 10. So I have it on a 4.5 right now.
You have it on a 4.5. So our question is more for Vicki and I, somebody wanting to use induction. So it would probably be about the same, since induction goes up to 9.
What I would say about cast iron on induction, because I use cast iron every day at home on my induction, is it does really get hotter and hotter and hotter. So you might want to start, depending on how much your preheat time is, you might want to start at a 7 or an 8 and then back it down to that 4, where you can kind of keep it at that consistent temperature.
And we have a very popular bread maker in our client base. His name is Mark, and he comes to us from Minnesota. And Mark has a question. He makes bread every weekend, by the way. And he's bought some of your stuff, I know, from the last class. Talking about the poolish, keeping it at 50 to 55 degrees overnight. Any problems putting it in the refrigerator? He's saying he doesn't have anywhere in his house that would really even be close to that temperature.
Yeah, I think you can throw it in the refrigerator. I haven't done that that often. It just slows down the fermentation dramatically. But you could just feed it with a bit warmer water to start. So as it's in the fridge, it starts off with a little bit warmer water to get active. So I don't see that being a problem. And I would think that the morning that you wake up, you just pull it out and get it to room temp and kind of reacclimate itself.
Yeah, I know that one of our customers is baking along with you, Terry, and Terry actually did start his last night or his there, and I don't know if it's a male or a female. I just know Terry in the fridge, and then took it out this morning. And Terry also was curious if when you're done on your cooktop, if you could take a couple minutes to talk about the folding process, which was in step 7. You talked about the folding and exactly how do you fold your dough?
Yeah, I personally do a coil turn, which I kind of lift up the dough from the upper third, tuck it underneath itself. And then I do that, I spin the bowl, and then I tuck it again. Sometimes I'll do that on all 4 sides, but it's kind of just to degas it for a moment.
Maybe we can show the technique as soon as we're done with the bake too with the dough you have in the bowl.
So you're actually doing that while it's in the bowl. You don't take it out and put it on the counter.
Right. But you can also, you could do your folds. You could do folds on a counter as well, but it's not your typical kneading. It's just a quick like tuck. It's rather gentle relative
Kind of like
to kneading.
folding it in half.
Right. You don't need to do that. So it's a rather gentle maneuver.
Those look beautiful.
The color's looking great. So now at this stage, you might be tempted to say, oh, they look great, I'm done. But I'm also just still watching the edges. I don't want to see a depression in the dough when I press on it lightly with my finger. I think we're almost there. It's feeling firm.
Would you ever try to use a thermometer to check the internal temperature?
I have not, but you could.
You certainly could. I've never done it. It's great when you can start to just, you get the feel of when something's done. You become a much more intuitive baker and a much more intuitive cook. So I never mess around with the thermometer, but it's certainly something you can do.
If you're nervous that they aren't done on the inside, your best bet is to put it in the oven.
Put it in the oven or really turn down the heat right now, which I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it way down because I'm happy with the color. I will feel comfortable if I have another minute or so to just make sure the center is thoroughly cooked. And you notice I spin them around a little bit because, there may be some edges that, have faced away from the hottest part of the oven that would benefit from facing inward. Just making sure there's a nice even chance to get fully cooked through. And you'll see, I don't know if you can see in the video, there's a little bit of smoking going on. I like to make decisions about what I'm gonna dust my pan with, whether it's English muffins or pizza. I like to make decisions on that based on whether or not I'm willing to tolerate some of the smokiness. So cornmeal, actually, corn and oats are 2 of the grains with the highest fat and oil content of any of the grains. And so those oils, when they hit a hot griddle, are going to burn faster than grains that don't have as high an oil content. So corn, high in oils, you will get some more smoking than you would if you were using rice flour. But if you like that texture and you like the yellow color that comes with cornmeal, then by all means, use it. Sometimes I tap on the surface of the English muffin and you can hear a little thunk thunk.
Yeah.
And that thunk thunk is starting to tell me that it's nice and dry on the inside.
It's amazing how we can hear that with technology. We're all the way in Maine and we can hear that. We even have people in Hawaii watching.
Wow. Flip as often as you need to make sure that you're not over browning a side or that you're continuing to give each side a chance to get just how you want it. We're just about there. Okay, I think Evan, what we could do is let's bring we'll bring the camera back over to the counter and you can show a folding technique. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the muffins to cool for just a second. And then we'll cut one open. We'll show you what the inside looks like.
All right, so I stopped the dough mixing earlier just so it's not fully developed, but for the purpose of showing you how to do the turn. So I grab it, you can see, I think. I take it like that, and so the end of the dough will kind of hang. And I tuck it underneath, I flip the bowl, and I tuck it again, and I'll give it a couple more tucks. I kind of view my dough as north, east, south, west, and then I'll just do a tuck under each direction, and that should suffice.
That's great, thank you. So you said that you make your English muffins for the cafe once a week. So they'll stay fresh for up to a week, or do they have to freeze them?
We freeze them immediately.
Okay.
We let them cool in entirety so they don't fill the bag with steam and then all that condensation would freeze. So we cool them, bag them, and then we throw them right in the freezer the night before. We'll thaw them. Then the morning of, we'll slice them open and toast them on the griddle, and then we'll assemble the sandwiches. Ideally, we'd be making them, fresh Saturday morning. Just, being a small operation, we have to, pivot.
Yeah. You'd have to hire an English muffin maker specifically for that job.
You're right.
We're almost at that point. Okay. Pretty happy with how these are looking.
And again, they could have popped
Look
maybe
amazing.
more if we gave them, they could have been taller, if we gave them more fermentation time, if they proofed longer, if the hydration was higher. But all these things are good to just sort out through repetition. And then you find kind of what works.
All right, so these are still pretty hot. I would recommend letting them thoroughly cool so you don't burn your fingers, and also so that the dough can finish what it's going to do in its transformation.
Because bread's still steaming on the inside. So the cooking process is still happening, particularly with sourdough coming out of an oven. But I bet we can crack them open.
You think we're safe to crack one open?
Safe.
Okay, so again, your choices with cracking open an English muffin would be a serrated knife, like a bread knife, or fork split. And if I'm at home, it's kind of hard to fork split 200 English muffins. So we do cheat and use a serrated knife at home. But I'm sorry, at the cafe. But at home, I definitely prefer a fork split English muffin. So I'm just going to show you.
Should we get a close up on the?
Yeah.
When you're
We're
fork splitting.
going to spotlight your hand.
We're going to spotlight your one more time.
Okay. Oh, there you go.
You're good. Yep.
There you go. So when you're fork splitting, you're just going to go around the English muffin with a fork. I've got my meat fork here. You could use any kind of fork, just to create a perforation line all the way around.
This is always nerve-wracking.
And these are still pretty hot too.
I'm biting my nails over here.
Still pretty hot. And so then when you get all the way around, you're just going to peel back like this.
Oh, heaven.
That's amazing.
So you're looking for a nice, open crumb, craggy surface. When you go to the toaster with lots of rough spots like this, they're all going to toast up nice and crispy and hold your jam.
Perfect.
All right, anything we forgot to cover, Evan?
No, any more questions?
I'm going to look at my email one last time. Mary, did you have any?
I had no other questions in our chef box.
Oops, I got to go to my email. Sorry.
All right. Let me go over and just spotlight the video from my computer.
I would just say as we close, I would hope followers feel experimental in the kitchen, tweak this recipe, make it your own. For those of you that are trying to work with more whole grains, this is a recipe that can be adapted to be 100% whole grains if you're looking to get as much fiber as possible. If you want this to be part of your daily breakfast routine, they're easy, they're healthy, they're fun.
They look amazing. You make it look so easy.
Do. And we would
They
not
can always-
mind making.
They can
What was
always be
that?
better. They can always be better.
I was going to say, we would not mind making that part of our breakfast routine.
Exactly.
So,
All right. Well, we don't have any other questions. Any final words of advice?
We'll keep the Miele discount live for the time being. So if you do want to head to the maingrains.com website and have a look at some different fun flours to try, we will offer a 10% discount if you just type in the Miele discount code. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We post about these things a lot. You can see a picture of our breakfast sandwich, I think. It's Maine Grains on Instagram, and it's Miller's Table Maine, which is the name of our cafe is the Miller's Table. You can also follow Evan's personal posts on Mainly Grains.
Mainly bread.
Mainly bread.
But yeah,
Bread.
you can always reach out and ask questions, and I'll try and answer what I can.
we really enjoyed, at least from our perspective, watching this. And I know our clients were sending us some fast and furious messages, which you got to all of the questions. So we appreciate that. I know that I'm hungry after this.
Yes. Well, thank you guys again. We really appreciate you taking time to teach for us. We had so much interest and
I missed
amazing.
I missed the cat, but when Evan did the side little peek around the camera view and did that near the stove, that was just as good as the cat for me.
Well, it's always fun to be with you. So till next time. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Right.
We'll
Thanks,
do this
guys.
again soon. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks so
All
much.
right, thank you.
Bye-bye.